The morning sun poured through the kitchen windows as Maylene sipped her tea, flipping through the mail that had arrived the day before. Bills, advertisements, a card from her sister. Nothing unusual. She paused, checking the dates in her head. Strange. The invitation should have arrived by now. For 10 years straight, Maylene had received an invitation to the St. Margaret's Hospital annual charity ball. It was one of the few high society events she actually enjoyed attending. Unlike most gatherings where her husband's wealth made people treat her differently, the hospital benefit had always felt meaningful. She had volunteered at St. Margaret's years before meeting her husband Thomas, back when she was just a nurse trying to make a difference. Maylene set down her cup and checked the calendar on the fridge. Just 3 weeks until the event. The invitations always came at least a month in advance. Maybe it got lost in the mail, she murmured to herself, though something in her gut told her otherwise. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace, a friend, who also served on the hospital's volunteer committee. "Are you going to the ball this year?" Grace's message read. Maylene replied quickly, "Haven't received my invitation yet. Has yours come?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared, again as if Grace was typing and deleting multiple responses. Finally, "Can I call you?" 5 minutes later, Maylene's hands trembled slightly as she set her phone down on the counter. According to Grace, the new chairwoman of the event committee, Pamela Winters, had decided to refresh the guest list this year. The goal was apparently to attract more influential circles and contemporary connections. "She kept your husband on the list," Grace had said hesitantly. "But she said something about you being lovely but not really the image they're trying to project now." Maylene closed her eyes. The sting of rejection was sharp but familiar. Before Thomas had become successful, she'd experienced plenty of doors, closing in her face. But this felt different, more personal, more deliberate. For 15 years, Maylene had maintained the same humble approach to life despite her husband's growing fortune. She still bought clothes on sale, volunteered at the community center every Wednesday, and kept close friendships with people she'd known long before the money came. She never flaunted wealth or used her husband's status to demand special treatment. Thomas had often teased her about it. "You're literally the only person in the world who became a billionaire's wife and decided to keep clipping coupons," he'd laugh, watching her carefully organize her grocery store savings. "Old habits," she'd always reply with a smile. But the truth was deeper than that. Maylene had watched wealth change too many people, had seen how it could hollow out a person until they became nothing but their bank account. She had promised herself that would never happen to her, and yet here she was being cut from a guest list, precisely because she wasn't showy enough, because she didn't flaunt the connections and lifestyle that Pamela Winters thought appropriate for their elevated social circle. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. Maylene poured her now cold tea down the drain and decided to go for a walk. The fresh air would clear her head, help her process this small but stinging slight. The neighborhood was peaceful at mid-morning, most residents already gone to work. Maylene nodded politely to the gardeners tending the immaculate lawns of the upscale community. Many of them knew her by name. She was the lady who always brought out cold drinks on hot days and warm coffee in winter. She found herself walking toward the community park, a small but beautiful green space she had helped design when they first moved to the area. Back then, Thomas was just beginning to see real success with his tech company. They could afford the house in this neighborhood, but only just. Now, 12 years later, he could buy the entire neighborhood without blinking. How quickly things had changed. Yet the park remained the same, a quiet sanctuary with benches placed thoughtfully in both sun and shade, native plants that bloomed in rotating seasons, and a small playground that was always filled with children after school hours. Maylene sat on her favorite bench, the one under the old oak tree. 2 years ago, she had fought the neighborhood association when they wanted to remove the tree, claiming its roots were damaging the pathway. She had paid for the path to be redesigned around the tree instead. Some battles were worth fighting. Was this charity ball situation one of those battles, or should she simply let it go? Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Grace. "There's more." Pamela has been telling people you wouldn't feel comfortable at the new, more sophisticated event anyway. Like she's doing you a favor by excluding you. Mei Lin's cheeks burned. The presumption of it all, to not only exclude her but to pretend it was for her own good. As if she, who had grown up the daughter of immigrants who worked 3 jobs between them to put her through nursing school, would be intimidated by Pamela Winters and her sophisticated friends. She took a deep breath. Anger wouldn't solve anything. She had learned long ago that reacting emotionally only gave people like Pamela more power. "Thanks for telling me," she texted back to Grace. "Please don't worry about it." By the time Mei Lin returned home, she had made peace with the situation. She would not attend the ball this year. She would not make a fuss. Life would go on, and she would find other ways to support the hospital she cared about. Thomas was home early, unusual for a Tuesday. He was in his home office, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents on his computer. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're home before sunset. Is everything okay?" Thomas looked up and smiled. That same smile that had first caught her attention when they met at a mutual friend's dinner party 18 years ago. Back then, he'd been a promising but still struggling entrepreneur with big dreams and an even bigger student loan debt. She'd been a dedicated nurse who loved her job but was growing weary of the night shifts. "Just wanted to work from home this afternoon," he said. "How was your day?" She hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect him from this petty drama. Thomas had enough on his plate running a global tech company. But they had promised each other honesty always. "The invitations for the St. Margaret's Ball went out," she said, keeping her voice casual. "Looks like I'm not on the list this year." Thomas's fingers stopped typing, his eyes sharp and perceptive behind his reading glasses, focused fully on her face. "What do you mean, not on the list?" Mei Lin shrugged, trying to seem more indifferent than she felt. "The new chairwoman, Pamela Winters, apparently decided I'm not quite the right image for their event this year. You're still invited, of course." "That's ridiculous," Thomas said, his voice suddenly quiet in that way she recognized, the calm before a storm. "You've supported that hospital for years, long before I could donate anything significant." "It's fine," Mei Lin insisted, moving into the office to perch on the edge of his desk. "Really, Thomas, it's just a party." "It's not just a party," he said, removing his glasses and setting them down carefully. "It's a deliberate slight against my wife by people who should know better." There was something in his tone that made Mei Lin look more closely at him. Thomas was typically easygoing, quick to laugh off social politics and drama. But there was no humor in his eyes now, only a cold, calculating look she rarely saw outside of his most difficult business negotiations. "Thomas," she said cautiously, "please don't make this into something bigger than it is." He reached for her hand, his expression softening as he looked at her. "You're too kind for your own good sometimes," he said, "always willing to smooth things over, to let people get away with treating you poorly." "I just don't think it's worth the energy to be upset about," she replied. "Besides, what would be the point? Making a scene would only prove Pamela right, that I don't belong in her precious social circle." Thomas was quiet for a moment, still holding her hand. Then he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're right, it's not worth getting upset about." Something in his tone made Mei Lin slightly uneasy. She knew her husband well enough to recognize when he was already forming plans in his mind. "Thomas," she said firmly, "promise me you won't do anything. Just let it go." He kissed her hand. "I won't do anything that would embarrass you," he promised. Mei Lin nodded, choosing to accept his words at face value, even as a small voice in her head warned her that Thomas had very carefully not promised what she'd actually asked. She stood up. "I'm going to start dinner. Do you have a preference?" "Whatever you feel like making," he said, already turning back to his computer. "I trust your judgment completely." As Mei Lin walked to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that despite her best efforts to downplay the situation, something had been set in motion. Thomas looked calm enough, but she recognized the determined set of his shoulders, the slight tightening around his mouth. The last time she'd seen that look, A business competitor who had publicly mocked Thomas's humble beginnings had found himself facing a surprisingly aggressive acquisition bid the very next week. The competitor's company now operated as a small division within Thomas's corporation. Mei Lin sighed as she opened the refrigerator. She hoped Pamela Winters knew what she was doing, because while Mei Lin might choose to walk away from a fight, her husband had built his fortune by knowing exactly when and how to strike back. And he never, ever forgot a slight against someone he loved. Thomas waited until Mei Lin had fallen asleep that night before he made his first move. He sat in the dim light of his home office, the blue glow of his computer screen reflecting off his glasses as he scrolled through his contacts. People called him the Glacier in business circles, not because he was cold-hearted, but because of his patience. Thomas never rushed. He never showed anger when challenged. He simply moved forward with unstoppable momentum, gradually but inevitably getting what he wanted. Tonight, that patience was being tested. The thought of Mei Lin being deliberately snubbed made his jaw tighten. She was the best person he knew. Kind, when kindness was hard, generous when no one was looking, and genuine in a world full of fakes. And some social climber thought she could erase Mei Lin to boost her own status? Thomas took a deep breath. He wouldn't lose his cool. That wasn't how he operated. He picked up his phone and sent a text to his assistant. Need information on Pamela Winters and the St. Margaret's Hospital Charity Committee. Full details by morning. Within minutes, his phone buzzed with a reply. On it, preliminary info. Pamela Winters, 42, took over committee 6 months ago. Married to Richard Winters of Winters Development Group. 3 children. Heavy social media. Presence. Apparent aspiration. Fashion Week front row. Thomas nodded to himself. Already the picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't about Mei Lin at all. This was about Pamela Winters trying to remake the charity event in her own image, turning a community fundraiser into her personal stepping stone to higher social circles. He closed his laptop and went upstairs. In the soft glow of the nightlight, he watched Mei Lin sleeping peacefully. She had put on her oldest, most comfortable pajamas, the ones with faded flowers that she refused to throw away despite him offering to buy her new ones countless times. They're perfectly good, she always insisted. Why waste? That was his wife, practical, unpretentious, and completely unimpressed by the trappings of wealth that seemed to drive everyone else around them. It was why he'd fallen in love with her all those years ago, when she'd looked at his ambitious business plans and asked questions about the people he'd help, rather than the profit he'd make. Thomas leaned down and gently kissed her forehead before returning to bed. By morning he would have a plan. Not for revenge, that was too small a word for what he had in mind. For correction. The next morning, Thomas was already dressed and halfway through his coffee when Mei Lin came downstairs in her robe. You're up early, she said, yawning as she poured herself a cup. Big day, he replied with a casual smile. How did you sleep? Like a rock, she said, then studied his face with suspicious eyes. You look too cheerful for 6:30 in the morning. What are you up to? Thomas raised an eyebrow. Can't a man be happy to see his beautiful wife? Mei Lin snorted. A man can, but when that man is you, and you're smiling like that before your second cup of coffee, it usually means you're plotting something. Thomas laughed and kissed her cheek. I've got meetings all day. Don't wait up if I'm late. As he drove to his office, Thomas reviewed the comprehensive file his assistant had already compiled. Pamela Winters had been desperate to chair the hospital charity committee for years. Her husband's real estate development business was successful but not exceptional. They lived well but were stretched thin maintaining appearances, the private school tuition for 3 children, the vacation photos meant to impress, the designer clothes Pamela showcased on her carefully curated social media accounts. The charity ball was Pamela's big chance to prove herself to the city's elite. She had already secured coverage from major local publications and was in talks with a national lifestyle magazine. She'd convinced several minor celebrities to attend and had been dropping hints about a special guest that most people suspected was a reality TV star with fashionable connections. Thomas made 3 calls before reaching his office. The first was to Harold Kim, owner of the Grand Plaza Hotel where the charity ball was to be held. Harold had been trying to get Thomas to invest in his hotel expansion for months. "Harold," Thomas said warmly, "I've been thinking about your proposal. Let's discuss it over lunch next week. And by the way, that charity event you're hosting, for St. Margaret's? I've heard some concerning things about the new leadership. Might want to double-check their deposit." The second call was to Diane Powell, editor-in-chief of the city's most prestigious lifestyle magazine, who had featured Thomas and Mei Lin in last year's Philanthropy Leaders issue. "Diane, sorry to call so early. Just wanted to give you a heads up about the St. Margaret's event. You might want to hold off committing coverage until you see how it unfolds. Something tells me it won't be the success story they're promising." The third call was to his old college roommate, now the chief of surgery at St. Margaret's Hospital. "Hey Paul, been too long. Listen, what do you know about this Pamela Winters running your charity ball this year? I'm hearing some troubling things about financial mismanagement." "No, nothing specific yet, just rumors. But maybe worth keeping an eye on, especially with the hospital's reputation at stake." By the time Thomas arrived at his office, seeds of doubt had been planted in 3 strategic locations. He hadn't told a single lie, just raised questions, suggested concerns, implied problems. The rest would take care of itself. His assistant met him at the door with an update. "Sir, I've confirmed your lunch with the mayor next Tuesday, and the CEO of Meridian Group can meet Thursday to discuss the merger. Also, Mrs. Chen called to remind you about dinner with her sister this weekend." Thomas nodded. "Thank you, Lily. One more thing. I need you to look into something for me. The Chen Foundation has been planning to announce a new initiative, hasn't it? I think it's time to move that up." Lily raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll get the team working on it right away." Throughout the day, Thomas attended meetings, reviewed contracts, and made decisions worth millions of dollars. But part of his mind was always working on what he now thought of as the St. Margaret's situation, not for his sake but for Mei Lin's. His wife would never ask for this kind of intervention. In fact, she would probably be upset if she knew what he was doing. But some things couldn't be allowed to stand. Some lessons needed to be taught. Across town, Pamela Winters was having the best morning of her social career. The event planner had just confirmed that the Grand Plaza's most elegant ballroom was secured with a favorable rate. The chef from that trendy restaurant everyone was talking about had agreed to create a special menu. The florist who did arrangements for the governor's mansion was on board. Everything was falling into place. This year's St. Margaret's charity ball would be remembered as the event that put Pamela Winters on the map. The guest list was perfect. Everyone who mattered would be there, including several billionaires like Thomas Chen, who could write the kind of checks that made headlines. She'd been smart to trim the list of the more ordinary attendees. People like Mei Lin Chen, who was nice enough but hardly the sophisticated presence Pamela wanted for her reimagined event. The woman wore the same simple jewelry every day, for goodness sake, despite having access to millions. What was even the point of having money if you lived like you were still middle class? Pamela's phone rang, the event coordinator from the Grand Plaza. "Mrs. Winters? I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a situation with the ballroom for your event." Pamela frowned. "What kind of situation?" "It appears there was a scheduling overlap that we just discovered. The ballroom won't be available on your date." "That's impossible," Pamela said, her voice rising. "We signed the contract weeks ago." "Yes, ma'am, I understand, but apparently another event had already reserved the space months earlier, and it wasn't properly entered in our system. It's an unfortunate error on our part." "Well, fix it. Move the other event." "I'm afraid we can't. It's the annual dinner for the Children's Cancer Foundation, and it was booked nearly a year in advance." Pamela felt a headache coming on. "Fine. Give us your second best space then." There was a pause. "That's also booked. But we can offer you our garden terrace room at a discount." "The garden terrace? That's half the size of the main ballroom." "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Winters. This is completely our error, and we will of course refund your deposit in full if you prefer to find another venue." Pamela wanted to scream. Finding another suitable venue 3 weeks before the event would be nearly impossible. "I'll have to call you back," she said tersely, ending the call. Before she could even begin making contingency plans, her phone rang again. It was the celebrity chef who had agreed to cater the event. "Mrs. Winters, I hate to do this, but I've had a family emergency come up, and I won't be able to handle your event after all. I've taken the liberty of providing 3 excellent alternatives, who might be available on short notice. Family emergency, 3 weeks before the event?" Pamela didn't believe it for a second, but what could she do? Force him to cook? "I'll consider the alternatives," she said coolly. No sooner had she hung up than her email pinged with a message from the magazine that had promised coverage. "Due to a shift in our editorial calendar, we regret to inform you that we will be unable to cover the St. Margaret's Hospital charity ball as previously discussed." Pamela stared at her phone in disbelief. What was happening? How could everything be falling apart at once? She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was Pamela Winters. She had handled challenges before. She would fix this. She always did. But as the day wore on, the problems continued to multiply. The florist had a supply issue. The photographer had double booked. 2 minor celebrities sent regrets. Each problem on its own would have been manageable, but together they formed an avalanche that threatened to bury all her careful plans. By evening, Pamela sat at her kitchen island with a glass of wine, scrolling through her contacts list in desperation. She needed to pull some strings, call in some favors, make this work somehow. Her finger hovered over Thomas Chen's number. His company had donated generously to the hospital for years. Maybe he could help with some of his connections. But something held her back, a nagging feeling that she couldn't quite place. Surely he wouldn't know about Mei Lin being removed from the guest list. Would he? Pamela shook her head. That was ridiculous. Thomas Chen was one of the busiest executives in the country. He wouldn't concern himself with something as trivial as a charity guest list. She took another sip of wine and continued scrolling, unaware that she had just avoided making a very costly mistake, one that would have accelerated the very plan that was already unfolding around her. 2 weeks before the charity ball, Mei Lin noticed something odd about her husband. Thomas was coming home earlier than usual, and he seemed almost cheerful about the upcoming weekend, a time he'd normally be buried in work. She caught him smiling at his phone several times, which wasn't like him at all. "You seem happy," she commented one evening as they sat on the back patio, watching the sunset. "Did something good happen at work?" Thomas took a sip of his tea. "Just some projects coming together nicely." Mei Lin narrowed her eyes. "What kind of projects?" "Nothing for you to worry about," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "How's the community center garden coming along?" She allowed the change of subject, telling him about the new vegetable beds the children had helped plant that afternoon. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas was up to something. In 15 years of marriage, she'd learned to recognize the signs. The slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, the extra sparkle in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. It made her nervous. The last time he'd looked this pleased with himself was when he'd orchestrated the takeover of a rival company that had tried to steal one of his employees. The takeover had been completely legal, entirely ethical, and absolutely devastating for the other company. Thomas never raised his voice, never made threats, never did anything that could be called wrong. He simply won. Mei Lin hoped whatever he was planning now wasn't related to the charity ball situation. She had already put that embarrassment behind her. Well, mostly behind her. The sting still lingered, but she'd decided it wasn't worth dwelling on. "I ran into Grace today," she said casually, watching his face. "She mentioned there are some issues with the St. Margaret's event. Venue problems or something." Thomas's expression remained neutral, but she caught the almost imperceptible twitch of his eyebrow. His tell. "Is that so? That's unfortunate." "Thomas," she said, her voice carrying a warning. "You promised not to do anything." He met her gaze, directly. "I promised not to do anything that would embarrass you, and I haven't." Before she could press him further, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. "I need to take this. It's Paul from the hospital." Mei Lin watched him walk inside, her suspicions growing stronger. Something was definitely happening, and somehow, her husband was involved. Across town, Pamela Winters was having the worst week of her social climbing career. The charity ball was falling apart piece by piece, and she couldn't figure out why. The replacement venue she'd secured after losing the Grand Plaza had just called with structural concerns that required immediate attention, meaning her event would need to be moved again. The backup caterer had suddenly doubled his prices, citing supply chain issues. The DJ, who had initially agreed to perform for free, was now asking for a fee that made Pamela's eyes water. Worst of all, the RSVPs were coming in far slower than expected. Several key society figures had declined, citing previous commitments. Even the reality TV star who had been her hoped-for special guest had canceled after her agent found scheduling conflicts. Pamela sat in her home office, surrounded by spreadsheets and lists, trying to salvage what was quickly becoming a disaster. Her husband Richard watched from the doorway with concern. "Maybe you should postpone the event," he suggested gently. "With all these problems, no one would blame you." "Postpone?" Pamela nearly shrieked. "Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation? I'd be a laughingstock." Richard sighed. "It's just a charity event, Pam. It's not worth making yourself sick over." "It's not just a charity event," she snapped. "It's my chance to show this city that I belong at the top, that we belong at the top." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "I thought it was about raising money for the hospital." Pamela waved, her hand dismissively. "Of course it is, but it can be about both things." As Richard walked away, shaking his head, Pamela turned back to her laptop. She needed solutions, and she needed them fast. She opened her email, hoping for some good news, only to find a message from the hospital's chief of surgery, Dr. Paul Bennett. "Mrs. Winters, I'm writing to express the board's concern about the challenges facing this year's charity ball. Given the importance of this fundraiser to our pediatric wing expansion, we'd like to schedule an emergency committee meeting tomorrow to discuss contingency plans." Pamela felt her stomach drop. An emergency meeting. The board was getting involved. Now, this was exactly what she didn't need. More people witnessing her failure. As she was composing a reply that would somehow project confidence despite the mounting disasters, a notification popped up on her phone. It was from her social media app, where she'd been documenting her journey planning the most exclusive charity event of the year. Someone had tagged her in a post. Curious, she clicked on it, then felt her blood run cold. It was an invitation to a different event on the same night as her charity ball. The Chen Foundation for Medical Research annual dinner, featuring a matching grant program that would double all donations made to St. Margaret's Hospital, the Chen Foundation. As in Thomas Chen. As in the husband of Mei Lin Chen, the woman Pamela had deliberately removed from her guest list. Pamela's hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. People were already confirming their attendance, people who had declined her invitations. The venue was the exclusive Lakeside Club, which never rented out its space for events. The guest list appeared to include everyone who was anyone in the city, except Pamela and her immediate circle. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself. But it was. And suddenly, all the mysterious problems with her event made a terrible kind of sense. The venue issues, the vendor cancellations, the declining RSVPs. Pamela had made a critical error in judgment. She had assumed Mei Lin was just a simple woman who happened to marry rich, someone whose absence wouldn't be noticed or cared about. She had never considered that Thomas Chen might take his wife's exclusion personally, or that he had the connections to create such precisely targeted chaos. She grabbed her phone and dialed her friend Vanessa, who moved in the highest social circles. "Vanessa, have you heard about this Chen Foundation dinner? The one happening the same night as my event?" There was an awkward pause. "Oh, Pam. Yes, I got the invitation yesterday. Well, everyone's talking about it." "What do you mean, everyone's talking about it?" "It was just announced." Well, Vanessa said hesitantly, the thing is they're offering this incredible matching grant program. Every dollar donated gets doubled. And they've got some amazing speakers lined up. That neurosurgeon who just won the big prize, and several patients whose lives were saved at St. Margaret's. But what about the celebrities, the fashion, the press coverage? Pamela demanded. There's that too, Vanessa admitted. But honestly, people seem more excited about the actual charitable impact. Plus, everyone loves Mei Lin. She's so genuine. You know? There's actually a bit of chatter about how she was left off your guest list. Pamela ended the call shortly after, her mind racing. This was worse than she thought. Not only was her event being overshadowed, but people were talking about her decision to exclude Mei Lin. Her attempt to elevate her social standing was backfiring, spectacularly. With shaking hands, she dialed Thomas Chen's office number. This had gone far enough. She would explain that there had been a misunderstanding, that of course Mei Lin was welcome at her event, that she had the utmost respect for both of them. Mr. Chen's office. A polite voice answered. This is Pamela Winters. I need to speak with Mr. Chen immediately regarding the St. Margaret's Hospital charity ball. I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters, but Mr. Chen is unavailable. He's in meetings all day regarding the Chen Foundation dinner. Please tell him it's urgent. It's about his wife. There was a pause. I'll pass along your message, but Mr. Chen has specifically asked not to be disturbed except for emergencies. This is an emergency, Pamela insisted, her voice rising. Understand you're upset, Mrs. Winters, but Mr. Chen's schedule is completely full. Perhaps you could try again tomorrow? Pamela hung up, furious and frightened. She was being stonewalled, and she knew it. Thomas Chen was deliberately avoiding her calls while systematically dismantling everything she had worked for. Her phone pinged with a new email notification. It was from the hospital board. After careful consideration, the board has voted to officially endorse the Chen Foundation dinner as this year's primary fundraising event for St. Margaret's Hospital. While we appreciate your efforts with the original charity ball, we believe it's in the hospital's best financial interest to focus our resources on the event with the matching grant program. We welcome your continued support in this new direction. Pamela stared at her phone in disbelief. Just like that, her event had been demoted to secondary status. All her work, all her planning, all her social maneuvering, made irrelevant with a single email. And the worst part? No one had raised their voice. No one had made threats. No one had done anything that could be called wrong. Thomas Chen had simply won. Later that evening, Thomas arrived home to find Mei Lin waiting for him in the kitchen. She had prepared his favorite meal, but her expression was serious. I got a very strange call today, she said as he hung up his jacket. From Pamela Winters. Thomas's face remained neutral. What did she want? She was practically in tears, apologizing for a misunderstanding about the guest list. Apparently my invitation was lost in the mail, and she's been trying desperately to reach me. How careless of her, Thomas remarked mildly, sitting down at the table. Mei Lin crossed her arms. And then I saw an announcement about a Chen Foundation dinner on the same night as the charity ball, featuring a matching grant program for the hospital. Yes, we've been planning that for a while, Thomas said, serving himself some rice. The foundation needs more public awareness. Thomas. Mei Lin's voice was stern now. What did you do? He looked up at her, his expression finally softening. I didn't do anything illegal, unethical, or embarrassing. I simply created a better alternative for the hospital and its supporters. By systematically ruining Pamela's event? I didn't ruin anything, he corrected. I just applied gentle pressure in certain areas. Any weaknesses in her event were already there. I merely brought them to light. Mei Lin sat down across from him, her expression troubled. This isn't like you. You don't usually get involved in social politics. Thomas set down his fork and reached for her hand. No, I don't. But this wasn't about social politics. This was about someone thinking they could disrespect my wife and face no consequences. I told you I didn't care about the invitation. But I care. Thomas said simply. I care that someone thought they could erase you, judge you as not good enough when you are the best person I know. I care that they thought your worth was determined by how much jewelry you wear or how many designer clothes you buy. Mei Lin was quiet for a moment, studying his face. So what happens now? Now, Thomas said, picking up his fork again. We host a wonderful dinner that raises twice as much money for the hospital as they've ever received before, and you get to decide where every penny goes. Despite herself, Mei Lin felt a small smile forming. You're impossible, you know that? So I've been told, he replied with a grin. Repeatedly. By you. She shook her head, but the smile remained. Part of her wanted to be upset with him for going behind her back. But another part, a part she didn't often acknowledge, felt a warm glow at being so fiercely protected, even from something as trivial as a party snub. Just promise me one thing, she said. No more secret plans, okay? We're supposed to be partners. Thomas nodded, his expression growing serious again. You're right. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I just didn't want you to worry or feel like you needed to intervene. I can handle Pamela Winters, Mei Lin said dryly. I've dealt with worse in the emergency room. I don't doubt it, Thomas laughed. So, are you going to help me plan this dinner? Because right now all we have is a venue and a guest list. We need someone who actually knows how to make people feel welcome. Mei Lin tapped her chin thoughtfully. I might have some ideas, but they won't involve ice sculptures or champagne fountains. Thank goodness, Thomas said with exaggerated relief. I was worried you'd go all Pamela Winters on me. That earned him a napkin thrown at his head, and the tension between them dissolved into laughter. By the time dinner was over, they were deep in conversation about how to make the Chen Foundation dinner not just a successful fundraiser, but a genuine community celebration, the kind of event that would make people feel good about giving rather than just being seen giving. And that, Thomas thought, as he watched his wife enthusiastically sketch out seating arrangements designed to foster meaningful conversations, was exactly why Pamela Winters had made such a terrible mistake. She had dismissed the very person who could have made her event truly special. The week before the two competing events found Mei Lin in her element. Once she had accepted that Thomas's alternative dinner was happening, with or without her input, she threw herself into making it meaningful, rather than merely expensive. No gold-rimmed plates. She instructed the event coordinator at the Lakeside Club, who looked slightly bewildered by this request. Most clients wanted the most extravagant options available. Let's use the simple white ones instead. But Mrs. Chen, the gold ones are our premium option and there's no additional charge for— I understand, Mei Lin said gently, but the white plates will showcase the food better, and they'll create a clean canvas for the table arrangements. The coordinator made a note, still looking puzzled. And for the centerpieces? We have stunning crystal vases available. Actually, Mei Lin said, I had a different idea. What if each table featured artwork created by the children from St. Margaret's pediatric ward? We could have their drawings professionally framed, simple frames, nothing fancy. And then after the dinner, guests could make additional donations to take home a piece of art. The coordinator's expression changed from confusion to interest. That's actually quite innovative, Mrs. Chen. I've never seen that done before. The hospital is about the patients, Mei Lin explained. This way, they're part of our evening, not just abstract beneficiaries. As they continued the tour of the venue, Mei Lin kept making similar choices, opting for meaning over flash, connection over impression. Instead of the traditional place cards, she suggested photos of hospital staff with brief stories about their work. Rather than printed programs listing donors by giving levels, she proposed a simple booklet sharing the hospital's greatest needs and most inspiring successes. By the end of the planning session, even the veteran coordinator seemed energized by this fresh approach. Mrs. Chen, she said as they wrapped up, I must say this is going to be unlike any charity dinner we've ever hosted. In the best possible way. Mei Lin smiled. That's the idea. We want people to remember why they're there, not just that they were there. As she drove home, Mei Lin found herself genuinely excited about the event. What had started as Thomas's elaborate revenge scheme had evolved into something that actually mattered to her, a chance to refocus the community's attention on the hospital's mission rather than the social status of its supporters. She was so lost in her thoughts about the dinner that she almost missed the familiar figure walking along the sidewalk, Pamela Winters, looking nothing like her usual polished self. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her clothes casual rather than designer. She was carrying a shopping bag from the local supermarket and seemed completely deflated. On impulse, Mei Lin pulled over. She rolled down her window. "Pamela, are you okay?" Pamela looked up, startled, then flushed with embarrassment when she recognized Mei Lin. "I'm fine," she said stiffly. "Just running errands." Mei Lin noticed the walk from the grocery store to Pamela's house was at least a mile, and the day was unseasonably warm. "Can I give you a ride home? It's pretty hot out." Pamela hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, practicality won. "That would be... thank you." The first minute in the car was painfully awkward. Pamela sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her shopping bag clutched on her lap, staring straight ahead. "How are your children?" Mei Lin asked finally, grasping for neutral conversation. "They're fine," Pamela replied, then sighed. "Actually, they're not. Abby's upset because I had to pull her out of ballet lessons. Budget cuts." Mei Lin glanced over, surprised by the admission. "I'm sorry to hear that." "It's fine. It's just dance lessons, not like it's food or shelter." Pamela's voice was brittle. They drove in silence for another block before Pamela spoke again, her words coming in a rush. "My husband left 2 days ago. Said he couldn't handle the social climbing anymore, that I'd become someone he didn't recognize." She gave a harsh laugh. "Turns out, I became someone I don't recognize either." Mei Lin slowed the car, processing this unexpected confidence. "Pamela, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's my own fault. I got so caught up in impressing people who don't actually care about me that I forgot what really matters." Pamela turned to look at Mei Lin directly. "I owe you an apology. What I did with the guest list was cruel and shallow. You didn't deserve that." Mei Lin pulled the car to the side of the road so she could give Pamela her full attention. "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it." "Your husband certainly made his point," Pamela said with a rueful smile. "The charity ball is officially canceled as of this morning. The hospital called it a consolidation of fundraising efforts, but everyone knows the truth. I crashed and burned spectacularly. Thomas can be thorough when he feels someone has been wronged," Mei Lin said carefully. "The thing is," Pamela continued, "I don't even blame him. If someone had done to my husband what I did to you, I'd have been furious too. I just never expected consequences. I've been playing these social games for so long, and it's always just been about who's in and who's out. No one ever really got hurt." She paused. "Until now, I guess." Mei Lin studied the woman beside her, a woman who, just weeks ago, had seemed like the epitome of social power and confidence, now looking defeated and lost. A flicker of compassion stirred within her. "Would you like to come to our dinner?" Mei Lin asked, surprising even herself with the invitation. "As my guest?" Pamela's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am. It's not about the guest list or who's important. It's about supporting the hospital, and it sounds like you could use a night out. After everything I did, wouldn't that be awkward for everyone?" Mei Lin shrugged. "Life is full of awkward moments. We survive them. Besides, I'm co-hosting. If I say you're welcome, you're welcome." Pamela looked down at her shopping bag, then back at Mei Lin. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because holding grudges is exhausting," Mei Lin said simply. "And because I think you've learned your lesson already." A tear slipped down Pamela's cheek, which she quickly wiped away. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Kindness isn't about deserving," Mei Lin replied. "It's just about being human." When Mei Lin told Thomas about inviting Pamela to their dinner, his reaction was predictably incredulous. "You did what?" he asked, looking up from his laptop with genuine shock. Please tell me you're joking. I'm not, Mei Lin said calmly, sitting across from him in his home office. And I'd like you to be civil to her when she comes. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. You never cease to amaze me. This woman deliberately humiliated you, and now you're not only forgiving her but inviting her to our event? She's going through a hard time. Her husband left her. Actions have consequences, Thomas said, though his tone lacked its usual certainty. Yes, they do, Mei Lin agreed. And your actions effectively destroyed her event, her social standing, and apparently contributed to the collapse of her marriage. Don't you think that's consequence enough? Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. When you put it that way, it sounds rather excessive. It was excessive, Mei Lin said gently. You went full glacier on someone who made a petty, shallow decision. It would be like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. A particularly annoying fly, Thomas muttered, but she could see his resolve weakening. The point is, Mei Lin continued, she's learned her lesson. She apologized to me, sincerely, I believe. Now it's time to show some grace. Thomas looked at his wife for a long moment, then shook his head with a rueful smile. You're a better person than I am. You know that, right? I do know that, Mei Lin said, returning his smile. It's why you keep me around. Among other reasons, he agreed, reaching for her hand. Fine, I'll be civil to Pamela Winters, but I'm not sitting next to her at dinner. I wouldn't dream of asking for that much, Mei Lin laughed. Baby steps. The night of the Chen Foundation dinner arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Perfect weather for the Lakeside Club's famous patio overlooking the water, where cocktails would be served before the main event. Mei Lin stood in front of her closet considering her options. She had several designer dresses Thomas had bought her over the years, most of them still with tags attached. Tonight, though, felt like an occasion to make a different kind of statement. She reached for a simple blue dress she'd owned for years, beautifully made but not flashy, elegant without being ostentatious. Around her neck, she fastened the jade pendant her grandmother had given her one truly precious piece of jewelry, not for its monetary value, but for its family connection. When she came downstairs, Thomas was waiting in his tuxedo. His eyes softened when he saw her. You look beautiful, he said. That's my favorite dress of yours. I know, she replied with a smile. You've always had good taste. They arrived at the venue early to oversee the final preparations. The main dining room had been transformed according to Mei Lin's vision, simple but beautiful, with the children's artwork taking center stage at each table. Hospital staff greeted them warmly, clearly delighted with the respect being shown for their work rather than being treated as background figures at a society event. As guests began to arrive, Mei Lin noticed a palpable difference from other charity functions she'd attended. People weren't just air-kissing and comparing outfits. They were actually reading the stories of hospital workers, examining the children's artwork, engaging with the purpose of the evening. Thomas stayed close to her side, greeting major donors and business associates with his usual charm. But Mei Lin could tell he was watching for one particular arrival. When Pamela Winters finally appeared at the entrance, looking elegant but subdued in a black dress, Thomas stiffened slightly. Be nice, Mei Lin whispered, squeezing his arm before going to greet her controversial guest. Pamela looked deeply uncomfortable, clutching her small purse like a shield. I'm not sure this was a good idea, she said quietly as Mei Lin approached. Nonsense, Mei Lin said warmly. Come, let me show you around. We've done something different with the tables I think you'll find interesting. As she guided Pamela through the room, introducing her to hospital staff and explaining the children's artwork, Mei Lin could feel the other woman gradually relaxing. By the time they reached Thomas, who was deep in conversation with the hospital's chief of surgery, Pamela seemed almost at ease. Thomas, Mei Lin said, touching his arm. You remember Pamela Winters? Thomas turned, his expression perfectly controlled. Mrs. Winters, thank you for coming. Pamela met his gaze with surprising steadiness. Mr. Chen, thank you for allowing me to attend. Your foundation has created a remarkable event. My wife created this event, Thomas corrected her, his voice cool but not hostile. I just provided the funding. Mei Lin is the heart behind everything you see here tonight. A flash of genuine respect crossed Pamela's face as she looked at Mei Lin. I can see that now. You've made this about the hospital and its patients in a way I never managed to do. Before Mei Lin could respond, the hospital director appeared, at Thomas's elbow, needing to discuss a last-minute detail about the donation matching announcement. Mei Lin excused herself to check on the seating arrangements, leaving Pamela momentarily alone. From across the room, Mei Lin watched as her former social nemesis stood awkwardly by herself for a moment before the hospital's pediatric nurse manager approached her. They began talking, and to Mei Lin's surprise, Pamela seemed genuinely engaged in the conversation, nodding and asking questions. Perhaps there was hope for Pamela Winters after all. Sometimes people just needed to be reminded of what truly mattered, and what didn't. As dinner was about to be served, Thomas found Mei Lin again and led her to their table. Have I told you tonight how extraordinary you are? He murmured in her ear. Only twice, she replied with a smile, but I never get tired of hearing it. He squeezed her hand. I mean it. Not just for putting this together, but for how you handled the whole situation. I wanted revenge. You found a way to make something positive instead. Well, Mei Lin said thoughtfully, sometimes the best revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about building something better than they could have imagined. As they took their seats and the evening officially began, Mei Lin glanced around the room filled with people united in support of a worthy cause. Whatever Pamela Winters had intended by excluding her from the guest list, the end result had become something unexpectedly meaningful. Sometimes, Mei Lin reflected, mistakes and slights could lead to outcomes no one could have predicted. And sometimes those outcomes were better than anyone could have planned. The Lakeside Club's grand dining hall hummed with conversation and soft music as dinner was served. Mei Lin watched with quiet satisfaction as guests admired the children's artwork centerpieces, many already placing bids to take them home. The simple white plates she had insisted on made the beautifully prepared food stand out, just as she had predicted. From her seat at the main table, she could see Pamela Winters engaged in conversation with Dr. Harriet Wong, the hospital's renowned pediatric surgeon. To Mei Lin's surprise, Pamela seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward to hear the doctor's stories about challenging cases and miraculous recoveries. Your guest seems to be fitting in better than I expected, Thomas murmured, following Mei Lin's gaze. People can surprise you, Mei Lin replied. Sometimes they just need the right opportunity. Thomas smiled and squeezed her hand under the table. You certainly surprised me when we first met. I thought I was just buying a cup of coffee for a pretty nurse. Instead, I found the woman who would completely change my life. Mei Lin laughed softly. By making you eat vegetables and give money away? Among other things, he said with a wink. Best decision I ever made. Their moment was interrupted as the hospital director, Dr. Alan Parker, approached their table. Everything is absolutely wonderful, he said warmly. I've never seen our staff so integrated into a fundraising event. Before, they usually feel like they're just there for show. That was all Mei Lin's doing, Thomas said proudly. She insisted that the real stars of the hospital should be highlighted. Dr. Parker nodded enthusiastically. It's making a difference. I've already had 3 major donors tell me they're increasing their pledges after talking with our nurses and technicians. People are connecting with the mission, not just writing checks to be seen. As dinner progressed, Mei Lin noticed something else unusual about the event. People weren't checking their watches or slipping away early as they often did at charity functions. Instead, they were fully engaged, lingering over dessert, deep, in conversations that seemed genuinely meaningful. When it came time for speeches, Thomas stood and approached the podium. The room quieted immediately. Everyone knew that when Thomas Chen spoke, it was usually worth listening. Good evening, he began. First, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight to support St. Margaret's Hospital. Your generosity will help countless patients receive the care they need. He paused, his eyes finding Mei Lin in the crowd. But I'm not the one who should be speaking tonight. This event wasn't my vision. It belongs to someone who understands far better than I do what makes a community strong and a charity worthwhile. He gestured toward Mei Lin. My wife worked as a nurse at St. Margaret's long before she met me, when she was just out of school and working night shifts to pay off her student loans. She knows what it means to care for others, not because it brings recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. So I'd like to invite Mei Lin to share a few words about why we're really here tonight. Mei Lin felt her cheeks flush. Public speaking had never been her thing, and Thomas hadn't warned her about this. As she hesitantly made her way to the podium, she saw him mouth sorry with a smile that suggested he wasn't sorry at all. Taking a deep breath, she looked out at the expectant faces. I didn't prepare a speech, she began honestly, but I can tell you why this hospital matters to me. For the next few minutes, Mei Lin spoke from her heart about her early days as a nurse, about the patients who had touched her life, about the dedication she had witnessed from doctors and staff who worked tirelessly regardless of whether anyone was watching or appreciating their efforts. The true measure of a community isn't how impressive our galas are or who attends them, she said, her voice growing stronger. It's how we care for each other when cameras aren't rolling and when there's nothing to be gained except the knowledge that we've made someone's life better. As she spoke, she noticed something unexpected. Pamela Winters was listening intently, occasionally wiping at her eyes. The woman who had once dismissed Mei Lin as not important enough for her guest list now seemed moved by her words. Tonight isn't about who's here, Mei Lin continued. It's about who we're helping. The children in the pediatric ward whose artwork decorates your tables, the elderly patients who need new heart monitors, the families who can't afford specialized care without our support. She concluded by thanking everyone for their generosity and reminding them that the donation matching program would continue through the end of the month. As she stepped away from the podium to warm applause, she felt a sense of accomplishment. That had nothing to do with social status or revenge. Thomas was beaming as she returned to her seat. That was perfect, he whispered. Better than anything I could have said. The hospital director took the stage next, revealing the total raised so far that evening. A figure that elicited gasps and applause, as it was more than double what any previous hospital fundraiser had generated. And with Thomas's matching program, the impact would be even greater. As the formal program concluded and guests began mingling again, Thomas excused himself to speak with some major donors. Mei Lin took the opportunity to check on how the artwork auction was progressing and was delighted to see that every piece had received multiple bids. She was examining the bid sheet for a particularly touching painting by an 8-year-old leukemia patient when she sensed someone beside her. That one's my favorite too, Pamela said quietly. Mei Lin turned, surprised. The colors are amazing, aren't they? Lucy, the artist, told me she was painting how she felt on a good day. Pamela nodded, studying the vibrant swirls of blue and yellow. I'd like to bid on it if that's all right. Of course, Mei Lin said, handing her a pen. As Pamela wrote down a generous amount, she spoke without looking up. I've been thinking a lot about what you said in your speech, about what really matters in a community. She set down the pen and met Mei Lin's eyes. I've been getting it wrong for a long time. It's never too late to change direction, Mei Lin offered. That's what I'm hoping, Pamela admitted. I called Richard, my husband, this afternoon. Asked if we could talk, really talk, not just argue about social climbing and appearances. She gave a small, hopeful smile. He's willing to meet for coffee next week. That's a good start, Mary, Lin said warmly. Pamela hesitated. I was wondering if the community center where you volunteer might need an extra pair of hands. I suddenly have a lot of free time, and I think I need to start giving back in ways that actually matter. Mei Lin felt a surge of genuine optimism for this woman who had seemed so shallow just weeks ago. We always need help, especially with the after-school reading program. I used to be an English teacher before I decided being a socialite was more important, Pamela confessed. Reading with kids sounds really nice, actually. Before Maylene could respond, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thomas had returned, along with Dr. Parker. "Sorry to interrupt," Thomas said, nodding. Politely to Pamela, "B." "Only twice," she replied with a smile. "But I never get tired of hearing it." He squeezed her hand. "I mean it. Not just for putting this together, but for how you handled the whole situation. I wanted revenge. You found a way to make something positive instead." "Well," Maylene said thoughtfully, "sometimes the best revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about building something better than they could have imagined." As they took their seats and the evening officially began, Maylene glanced around the room filled with people united in support of a worthy cause. Whatever Pamela Winters had intended by excluding her from the guest list, the end result had become something unexpectedly meaningful. Sometimes, Maylene reflected, mistakes and slights could lead to outcomes no one could have predicted. And sometimes those outcomes were better than anyone could have planned. The Lakeside Club's grand dining hall hummed with conversation and soft music as dinner was served. Maylene watched with quiet satisfaction as guests admired the children's artwork centerpieces, many already placing bids to take them home. The simple white plates she had insisted on made the beautifully prepared food stand out, just as she had predicted. From her seat at the main table, she could see Pamela Winters engaged in conversation with Dr. Harriet Wong, the hospital's renowned pediatric surgeon. To Maylin's surprise, Pamela seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward to hear the doctor's stories about challenging cases and miraculous recoveries. "Your guest seems to be fitting in better than I expected," Thomas murmured, following Maylin's gaze. "People can surprise you," Maylin replied. "Sometimes they just need the right opportunity." Thomas smiled and squeezed her hand under the table. "You certainly surprised me when we first met. I thought I was just buying a cup of coffee for a pretty nurse. Instead, I found the woman who would completely change my life." Maylin laughed softly. "By making you eat vegetables and give money away? Among other things," he said with a wink. "Best decision I ever made." Their moment was interrupted as the hospital director, Dr. Alan Parker, approached their table. "Everything is absolutely wonderful," he said warmly. "I've never seen our staff so integrated into a fundraising event before. They usually feel like they're just there for show." "That was all Maylene's doing," Thomas said proudly. "She insisted that the real stars of the hospital should be highlighted." Dr. Parker nodded enthusiastically. "It's making a difference. I've already had 3 major donors tell me they're increasing their pledges after talking with our nurses and technicians. People are connecting with the mission, not just writing checks to be seen." As dinner progressed, Maylin noticed something else unusual about the event. People weren't checking their watches or slipping away early as they often did at charity functions. Instead, they were fully engaged, lingering over dessert, deep in conversations that seemed genuinely meaningful. When it came time for speeches, Thomas stood and approached the podium. The room quieted immediately. Everyone knew that when Thomas Chen spoke, it was usually worth listening. "Good evening," he began. "First, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight to support St. Margaret's Hospital. Your generosity will help countless patients receive the care they need." He paused, his eyes finding Maylene in the crowd. "But I'm not the one who should be speaking tonight. This event wasn't my vision. It belongs to someone who understands far better than I do what makes a community strong and a charity worthwhile." He gestured toward Maylin. "My wife worked as a nurse at St. Margaret's long before she met me, when she was just out of school and working night shifts to pay off her student loans. She knows what it means to care for others, not because it brings recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. So I'd like to invite Maylene to share a few words about why we're really here tonight." Maylin felt her cheeks flush. Public speaking had never been her thing, and Thomas hadn't warned her about this. As she hesitantly made her way to the podium, she saw him mouth "sorry," with a smile that suggested he wasn't sorry at all. Taking a deep breath, she looked out at the expectant faces. "I didn't prepare a speech," she began honestly, "but I can tell you why this hospital matters to me." For the next few minutes, Maylin spoke from her heart about her early days as a nurse. about the patients who had touched her life, about the dedication she had witnessed from doctors and staff who worked tirelessly, regardless of whether anyone was watching or appreciating their efforts. The true measure of a community isn't how impressive our galas are or who attends them, she said, her voice growing stronger. It's how we care for each other when cameras aren't rolling, and when there's nothing to be gained except the knowledge that we've made someone's life better. As she spoke, she noticed something unexpected. Pamela Winters was listening intently, occasionally wiping at her eyes. The woman who had once dismissed Mei Lin as not important enough for her guest list now seemed moved by her words. Tonight isn't about who's here, Mei Lin continued. It's about who we're helping. The children in the pediatric ward whose artwork decorates your tables, the elderly patients who need new heart monitors, the families who can't afford specialized care without our support. She concluded by thanking everyone for their generosity and reminding them that the donation matching program would continue through the end of the month. As she stepped away from the podium to warm applause, she felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with social status or revenge. Thomas was beaming as she returned to her seat. "That was perfect," he whispered. "Better than anything I could have said." The hospital director took the stage next, revealing the total raised so far that evening. A figure that elicited gasps and applause as it was more than double what any previous hospital fundraiser had generated. And with Thomas's matching program, the impact would be even greater. As the formal program concluded and guests began mingling again, Thomas excused himself to speak with some major donors. Mei Lin took the opportunity to check on how the artwork auction was progressing and was delighted to see that every piece had received multiple bids. She was examining the bid sheet for a particularly touching painting by an 8-year-old leukemia patient when she sensed someone beside her. "That one's my favorite too," Pamela said quietly. Mei Lin turned, surprised. "The colors are amazing, aren't they? Lucy, the artist, told me she was painting how she felt on a good day." Pamela nodded, studying the vibrant swirls of blue and yellow. "I'd like to bid on it if that's all right." "Of course," Mei Lin said, handing her a pen. As Pamela wrote down a generous amount, she spoke without looking up. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in your speech, about what really matters in a community." She set down the pen and met Mei Lin's eyes. "I've been getting it wrong for a long time." "It's never too late to change direction," Mei Lin offered. "That's what I'm hoping," Pamela admitted. "I called Richard, my husband, this afternoon, asked if we could talk. Really talk, not just argue about social climbing and appearances." She gave a small, hopeful smile. "He's willing to meet for coffee next week." "That's a good start." "Mei," Lin said warmly. "I also—" Pamela hesitated. "I was wondering if the community center where you volunteer might need an extra pair of hands. I suddenly have a lot of free time, and I think I need to start giving back in ways that actually matter." Mei Lin felt a surge of genuine optimism for this woman who had seemed so shallow just weeks ago. "We always need help, especially with the after-school reading program. I used to be an English teacher before I decided being a socialite was more important," Pamela confessed. "Reading with kids sounds really nice, actually." Before Mei Lin could respond, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thomas had returned, along with Dr. Parker. "Sorry to interrupt," Thomas said, nodding politely to Pamela. Dallin has something he'd like to discuss with us." Dr. Parker stepped forward, his expression serious but enthusiastic. "Mrs. Chen, your husband has just proposed something remarkable. In addition to the matching donations, he's offered to fund a new patient advocacy program at the hospital." Mei Lin looked at Thomas questioningly. "It would ensure that care priorities are determined by medical needs rather than other factors," Thomas explained, his voice carefully neutral though his meaning was clear. "Social connections and wealth would no longer influence who received the best care. But," Dr. Parker continued, "he insists that you should lead the development of this program, given your background in nursing and your understanding of patient needs." Mei Lin blinked in surprise. "Me? But I haven't practiced nursing in years." "You don't need to," Thomas said. You need to be the voice making sure the hospital remains focused on its mission. You've always had a gift for seeing what truly matters, Doctor. Parker nodded eagerly. The board has already expressed enthusiasm for the idea. With your guidance and Mr. Chen's funding, we could create a model program that other hospitals might adopt. As the implications sank in, Mei Lin felt a rush of emotion. This wasn't just about tonight's event anymore. This was about creating lasting change in how the hospital served its community. I'd be honored, she said finally, but I'd want to include voices from all parts of the hospital community, not just doctors and administrators, but nurses, technicians, support staff, and most importantly, patients and their families. That's exactly why you're the right person for this, Dr. Parker said with satisfaction. As they discussed initial ideas for the program, Mei Lin noticed Pamela quietly excusing herself. But instead of leaving the event, she approached a group of nurses who were gathered near the children's artwork display. Within moments, she was engaged in conversation with them, listening more than speaking, a noticeable change from the Pamela of just a few weeks ago. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Thomas and Mei Lin stood together near the entrance, thanking people for coming. The event had been an unqualified success by any measure. Funds raised, connections made, mission advanced. You know, Thomas said as the last guests left. This turned out very differently than I initially planned. How so? Mei Lin asked, though she already knew the answer. I wanted to teach Pamela Winters a lesson about consequences, he admitted, but somehow you turned it into something more important, something that will actually make a difference. Mei Lin smiled and leaned against his shoulder. That's because the best revenge isn't about punishment at all. It's about creating something good that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist. Have I mentioned lately that marrying you was the smartest thing I've ever done? You might have mentioned it, she replied with a laugh. But I never get tired of hearing it. As they walked to their car under a sky full of stars, Mei Lin reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A thoughtless exclusion from a guest list had led to an evening that would change countless lives through the new patient advocacy program. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes, if you approached them with the right heart, and that, she thought, was a lesson worth learning for everyone, whether they were billionaires or not.